The musical expression of spirituality has occupied composers throughout human history. Today, in countries where choir and organ music flourishes, liturgical choirs provide a genuine living context for contemporary classical music and a career path for those who write and perform it. In Britain alone, dozens of cathedrals and thousands of churches around the country ensure a continuing demand for material, while royal and state occasions showcase British choral music to international audiences of billions. But how does this world work in practice, and what are the opportunities and pitfalls for composers? And my name is Ian Wilson. I'm a member of the Colchester New Music Group, and these questions were written by Alex Bluston, another member. And the questions are being directed to, as you can see in your screen, Sarah MacDonald and Alan Bullard, two musicians who are deeply engaged with new church music. And firstly, since neither of you started via the traditional route as a cathedral chorister, what drew you to this area? And we'll start with Sarah.
Well, I am of an age that I could not be a cathedral chorister because I'm a woman and I was a girl and they didn't exist back then. I got particularly interested in choral training when I was studying in Toronto, and I was a first study pianist. And then I came to Cambridge, where I was an organ scholar at one of the colleges, and I have been fascinated by and sort of immersed in choir training for many decades now, and therefore I know the repertoire. I've got to know the repertoire since then.
Thank you, Sarah. What about you, Alan?
Yeah, well, I'm of an age where in a way, if you were studying music, singing and choral singing was very much part of it. I mean, I can't remember when I first wrote something for choir, but I was, sort of in my early teens, I think. And then I went to the Royal College of Music, and my composition teacher turned out to be Herbert Howells. And of course, one of the premier choral composers and church music composers of his generation. So it just sort of naturally happened. I don't remember ever thinking about it. Writing music involved as writing for choirs as well as for instruments. And as far as actually writing for the church was concerned, I think again it was a given, really. It was a natural thing to happen if you grow up in that kind of environment. So I never sang in a church choir. I was never a chorister, but at my school, we sang quite a lot of church music, and we had a morning assembly. The choir sang an introit or something quite often, So there was a Christian ethos within the school, and the church music was part of that. One of my biggest regrets is that I never was a chorister in a parish church or a cathedral or anywhere like that, because I think I would have probably been a better church music composer for it, or at least wouldn't have to somehow would have realized what it was all about rather earlier in my life.
Well, thank you. This next question is very long. I'm going to split it into parts. So let's take the first part. What are the main types of Anglican liturgical choir in the UK? Where and how often do they sing? And who are the singers and how are they managed and funded? I'll say that again. The main types of Anglican liturgical choir in the UK, how often they sing, and who are the singers and how are they managed and funded?
Shall I take that? Basically, there are, a huge range. Certainly, if you're talking Anglican, there's parish church choirs. There are collegiate choirs in college chapels in universities. There are big or major parish churches, which are more intense, and then they're right up to cathedrals. And there is everything in there from entirely adult volunteer groups of singers to fully professional choirs with adult professional singers and children in the front row who attend specialist choir schools, and pretty much everything in between. At university level, you've got undergraduates who sing 2 or 3 services a week as well. And some of them are volunteer and some of them are paid, and some of them, some of them are managed because they are just a member of the parish, and some are managed by the precentor at the cathedral. So I would say that is a very, very potted history, and anyone who would like to know more, should just do a quick Google search.
There's another bit to it, isn't there? Are things changing? Well, yes.
I mean, yes, but they're always changing, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
It was different in 1650, and then it was different again in the 18th century, and then the 1970s had a big effect on it.
I would say in part it's quite interesting in that depending on which survey you read, church music is on the rise or on the wane. But what does seem to be true is that evensong seems to be becoming a very popular thing. I read that Bob Geldof had made some very strong comment about how wonderful evensong was. Or there seems to be a bit of a sort of cult following of evensong. Would you agree with that? Or
yes, and at university level of Compline as well, actually.
Yeah. There's a sort of, both of those services, evensong and Compline, have a sort of meditative quality to them, which very much appeals to the current way that many people think. There are many people who may not be, if you like, traditional Christian, but do feel that somehow that quiet and calm that you get at those services help them to commune with God or whatever they feel they're communing with.
Yes. The next question is, lots of composers turn out Christmas carols and short anthems, but what types of liturgical work are actually in demand, and for which forces?
Well, in demand, I mean, the stuff that we have to, certainly at the busier end of the liturgical spectrum, the stuff we have to do every day, responses and canticles primarily. And for what forces? I know that there's a lot of demand for good singable sets of responses and canticles for children's voices, i.e., probationers, evensong on a Tuesday, for example. And that's quite different from the concept of upper voices or SSA, which is a different thing entirely, but for unison trebles. And if you look on Facebook sort of music director groups, you'll often get the questions, are there any settings of the canticles, the evening canticles, for upper voices in unison with organ by female composers, for the people that are actually trying to broaden their music rep choices, I guess, and diversify their music rep. But they probably have a very specific, they're looking for people like Alan Bullard and Sarah MacDonald rather than the professional concert composers. There is a wonderful setting by Diana Burrell, but it's really hard. And so it's I would say what's in demand is singable music by, as it were, jobbing church musicians, of which both Alan and I are. Philip Moore is the other person that I put into that. He's a phenomenal composer, but he actually did the job for a long time, and he knows how to write something for a wet Tuesday in February.
Yeah, I agree, Sarah, and it is actually heartening to see that this enthusiasm for widening the range of the staple material for the Church of England services, and long may that continue. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Is it possible to become a competent and successful choral composer without having either sung in or directed choirs yourself? Alan partly answered that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably is, because composers, are used to writing music for all sorts of instruments that they don't play. So therefore, the same would be true of voices, I guess. Speaking for myself, I have sung in choirs on and off for most of my life. I've very, very rarely conducted a choir, and hadn't done so at all until about 10 years ago. So consequently, I think there's a lot that I learned when I started conducting a choir, and I must have learned a great deal singing in choirs, but I can't say that it's not possible, whether it's possible to do all that without. It probably helps. Sarah, what do you think?
I think there are a couple of, I mean, I agree with you. Obviously, composers spend a lot of time writing music for instruments that they don't play. But I think there are a couple of things that are specific to choral music that some composers forget. Very, very basic things like you don't, even if you're writing for an amateur violinist, they don't have to have perfect pitch to know where to start. So singers need to know how to find their notes.
Yeah.
And a very small proportion of the population can just pluck it out of thin air. But every violinist can find a B flat or whatever it is they need. And some composers forget that very basic thing. So if you're writing for something with organ, you need to think, where is my soprano going to find, where are those singers going to find their notes from? And if they have a rest for a few bars, how are they going to come in again? Because they're not going to just be able to come in the way even somebody with only grade 5 clarinet is going to be able to find. So it's different from that perspective. I think one of the other things, I mean, people who write for wind instruments might think about this, but one of the other things that I have found that some non-specialist choral composers or composers who have never sung in choirs, they forget that singers have to breathe. And if they've got the BBC singers, then, there's a bit more sophistication. A lot more of them have perfect pitch and they have really good singing techniques, so they can go for longer without breathing. But actually, only a very small proportion of the population is going to have their music sung by the BBC singers. And I'm not suggesting that means you have to write easier music. You just need to think about practicalities.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, what I've done a lot, because I often think particularly when I'm writing for amateur choirs, as I mostly do, I put myself in the position of a man who for years I used to stand next to in our church choir. Let's call him Fred. That wasn't his name, but we'll call him that. He's no longer with us, sadly. But Fred would always try really hard to sing the tenor part correctly and accurately. When he got it right, he would sing it quite loudly, whatever it was marked as in the score. And he was very pleased to be able to do that. But it took Fred some time to work out from the other voices where he had to come in, what note he had to come in on, and that sort of thing. Once he'd got there, he was absolutely fine. And I always think of Fred when I'm writing my parts and thinking, could he have done this? Could he have done that? And that's my sort of guideline.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that people who haven't had at least some training in singing need to think about is tessitura, which is not the same as range. And of course, violins have tessitura as well. But, how loud can a singer sing in a particular range for an extended period of time, or indeed how quietly? And a knowledge of how the human voice works and each different part in the human voice, where if you want a really loud chord, it's not necessarily going to be at the extremes of the range, but either low or high. And if you want your soprano section to end on a fortissimo chord, don't give them a middling B flat, but don't give them the top B flat either. Right. You want to give them the F, because that's where the ping is if you're in a B flat major piece or whatever. And that kind of understanding of where instruments, even really, really well-trained amateurs or indeed semi-professional singers, where you're going to get the best out of them. And I was commissioned a year or two ago to write for something for the 16, and actually was told quite specifically, the 16, you think they could do anything. Well, they can't do anything, but, the basses really hate being asked to drone away on a low D for page after page, which is a very common thing for a particular style of contemporary composer to do. And, it was interesting because, you think, well, if you've got the 16, then you can ask them to do anything. But actually, there are things that even the 16 don't like to do. And that's one of them. So
I think it's the danger of Sibelius, isn't it? That as long as it's not gone red, you think it's
yes.
okay. So you just operate between the range of reds. Yes, absolutely. Here's our next question then, and this is related. I think it's a very good question. Um, what is the best way of improving one's writing for choir and organ?
Simply to sing in a choir and to sit at an organ console. And I actually did meet a chap from the States who sent me a piece that I thought had a lot of potential, but it was obvious that he'd not done much singing. He then went and joined the Harvard Glee Club or whatever it was. And then a year later, he sent me another piece, which was fantastic. And he said, I can't tell you how much I learned the first 2 rehearsals, let alone the past year of singing. So even if you're not a singer, go and sing in a choir.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, that was an easy one. Let's go on to our next one then. If a composer doesn't direct their own choir, how would they go about trying out a piece on real singers?
Promise of a pint to some friends.
I mean, this is all to do with a problem that many composers have, particularly younger ones, in terms of getting that sort of feedback. I mean, I think the only thing one might say is that there are plenty of professional and semi-professional choirs now have outreach programs where they do offer young composers the opportunity to hear their music, and that's I think a great development, and must be a good thing. I think other than that, yes, I don't know really. I mean, part of being a composer is actually getting to know performers, getting to know singers, and getting in there and sort of involving yourself with what's going on. If you sing in a choir, there's a better chance of your conductor agreeing to try a piece out that you've written, for example.
I think it's something the British orchestras are doing a lot with universities. My son did his music degree in Liverpool, and the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic, was playing chamber music for the students at workshop their pieces. It was an absolutely fantastic experience. And it'd be great if more choirs were able to do that same kind of work. But I know that there's not necessarily the funding for it. Okay, well, let's move on to our next question, which is, what are the best ways of promoting one's work to directors of music and publishers? And I'd like to add something in on this because I write, as in novels.
Yeah.
And the submission system is very, very organized and transparent for submitting a novel. You've got to write a synopsis that's 2 pages. You've got to write a covering letter that includes ... And yet I've never felt with music there's the same level of clarity about how you submit to publishers. So I wonder if you could tackle that both to choral directors and to publishers.
Okay, well, to choral, shall I do choral directors?
Yes.
I get a lot of music sent to me. Pick your time. Don't send it the week before Advent Sunday because it's just going to get recycled. I would suggest that you don't send PDFs because they get buried in inboxes. But actually print out a copy, have it properly bound, put it in a post with a letter, and send it to the director of to a load of directors of music of the kinds of choirs that that piece is likely to appeal to. And I think I would also suggest that you don't pester us, because that's likely to make it get ignored intentionally as opposed to just by accident. I mean, if I get, maybe I've tried to cut down on them, but maybe 10 or 12 new pieces per month sent to me, I build up the pile, and then once every 18 to 24 months, I just go through the whole thing and look at everything. I don't look at stuff when it comes in because I never have time. And I'd throw out stuff that immediately, if it's secular music that I'm not going to have any need for, or if it is written for piano, violin, and one melody instrument, because I don't have those forces, or if it's written, you know, if they send it to me at Ely and it's written for a women's choir rather than a bunch of 10-year-olds, you know, so it's got to be targeted, and you need to be patient. And sometimes people will bite, and sometimes they won't, and sometimes they don't bite because they don't like your music, and sometimes they don't bite because they simply haven't found time to look at it.
You know, given that things sometimes can end up in junk, what do you think would be a reasonable length of time to give? Or would it be worth giving a prompt, or do you think?
Well, if you sent a hard copy in the post, then it's not going to go into the spam file.
No. Could I just come in on that? Because I'd just like to say that Sarah was absolutely wonderful to me some years ago by performing a range of my music, which had been sent to her, and making some recordings too. And that was a really lovely experience, and really, I think, encouraged and developed my career as a composer. So the role of the conductor is really, really important from that point of view. But how it actually all works, and in particular thinking about publishers now, how you get a publisher interested in your music, I really don't know, I'm afraid. And people often ask me this question, and it's a very difficult one to answer, because you know, people look at a composer who's been published by a major publisher like I have, and they think, well, you know, how did it happen? How did he do it? And I think, looking back now, I really can't remember, except there was an element of personal contact in that, you know, I somehow or other found myself in correspondence with the person who made the decisions. And, you know, and I think, and that was 25 years ago. And I think it's more difficult now to do that with publishers generally, partly because the music publishing industry is going through a very big period of change because of the way people buy music and the way people consume music. And so they're finding their direction difficult to focus on too. So one of the ways that they're doing that is by, rather than waiting for composers to send them music that they might then consider to publish, they're now saying, okay, we'll produce a book of this or a book of these sort of pieces, and we'll ask all the people who we know are a safe bet to write music or find music for these books. And so the odd piece coming in is not so much what they're interested in. It's more getting a collection of pieces together. How you get in as a young composer at that point, I'm afraid I really don't know. So the answer for many composers is to do it themselves, self-publish, and that is a much easier prospect now than it was in the past because of the internet and so on. So I do that with a lot of my music, because not all my music is suitable for traditional publishers or doesn't fit in with their programs. So I do that a lot, and I know many other composers who successfully do that as well. So if you're a young composer and trying to develop your career, don't despair if you can't find a publisher of your music. Find ways to do it yourself in a professional way.
Can I add something to that, actually? This is where I think organizations like Colchester New Music Group are really valuable, because I remember sending a wind quintet to a publishing company called Fortin Music, and I didn't get a reply. And then actually we had a project that was done through Colchester New Music Group with the National Flute Choir. And I went along to the workshop. They played my piece, and the players said, "Go and talk to Rob over there, because he's the CEO of Fortin Music." So I went over and talked to Rob, submitted it, and sure enough, it got published. And something I did after that point that I think was really good is I wrote to Rob and said, "What kind of pieces are you looking for? You know, what would you like?" right?
Yeah.
And he gave me a whole big list, and they all ended up getting published, the ones that I sent to him. So I think that's really, really useful. So the next one, composers looking to make a living from their music may see John Rutter as indicative, but is church music really a viable area in which to build a sustained income as a composer in comparison with, say, media, film, opera, or concert commissions? What do you feel about that? Not everybody's an Eric Whittaker, I suppose. Alan.
Yeah, could I just say, so this is a general point, because I know we're running out of time, and I think it's an important point, that music for the church is very different from most other types of music in that it's not designed for the concert hall. It's designed to aid worship. It's designed to enable the worshipper to, if you like, pray, speak more closely to God, do the sort of things that you would expect to do within a church service. It has a different function. And because it has a different function, that has an effect on the kind of musical style that the composer adopts. I don't think I've quite answered the question, except to say that, church music, I think, can be a viable direction to work in. You don't have to be, and you mentioned John Rutter, who actually I believe is not a practicing Christian, but nevertheless is very good at understanding what kind of music works and helps people to worship. And so, so that's what it's about, really. And so it's a quite different thing. It's perfectly possible for people to build their career on all sorts of different musical styles and all sorts of different groups. But it may result that church music is a different area simply because of the demands of it. Sorry, I've gone on for too long, Sarah.
But that's just to bring that absolutely critical answer and brilliant answer back to the question. One of the reasons that it's different from a viable financial point of view is that you can get as many performances as you like of, Sarah McDonald in A flat, and it's great. It gets sung all over the place, and I'm very grateful for that. But I do not receive a penny in performance royalties for that because it is all done in the context of sacred worship, and that is a purely financial result of the fact that the purpose of the music is different. Now, when they buy a set of copies, I get some royalties, but once that's done, they can sing it as many times as they like, and I never see a penny. So anyone who thinks that there's a commercial side to it, to writing music for the church, I mean, of course there's a little bit, but it's not not the way there is if you specifically go in to write film music, where every time somebody plays that, or hopefully every time somebody plays that, particular suite from your film music, you're going to get a piece, a PRS return, because that doesn't happen. It's not how the financial side of church music works. But on the flip side, there are plenty of, concert composers who get one performance of their piece and then that's the end of it. Whereas if you get a piece of church music into the repertoire, it gets performed over and over and over again in that particular place. And that's actually a really rewarding thing. And I get a nice note from, random people in Australia when they sing my responses. And I think, isn't that nice? So most composers, I think, are going to have a portfolio career. Full stop. They need to teach. Absolutely. They need to perform. They need to, they need to write. They need to do lots and lots of things, and that's how music is working these days.
Yep. Of course, in the lower brow element of church music, you've got CCLI, haven't you? Where the churches report back what Christian choruses songs are done, but then you get vanishingly small amounts of money for that.
Oh, tiny, yeah.
So I'd like to thank you very much, both of you, Sarah McDonald, Alan Bullard, for your answers to those questions. I think they'll be really useful for members of the Colchester New Music Group and anyone who visits its website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Been lovely to chat.